Let me know. Fabulous. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Spinning Yarn speaker series of 2024. My name is Matthew Rowe, as always, and I am the CEO of the Campaign for Wool in Canada and its parent organization, the Canadian Wool Council. This is a very special year for us because 2024 marks 10 years since now their Majesties, the King and Queen, launched the Campaign for Wool on a windy pier in Pictou, Nova Scotia, back in 2014. And so we are really excited at all of the different activities that will be taking place throughout this year. So please stay tuned for that. We'll also be diving into some of the priorities that will be shaping some of those activities as part of that presentation. But before you move forward, it's good to take a look back at where you've been. And the topic of today's Spinning Yarn Speaker Series is looking at sort of all that was accomplished back in 2023, as well as highlighting the where we're hoping to take us in our 10th anniversary year. So I'm going to just very quickly go through our overall annual report. This is now posted on our website. Feel free to download, to share, to post again. It's a great reference. Sometimes it's very helpful doing this process. Obviously, we have to do it to report back to our donors and supporters. But it's amazing actually what you do in the course of a year. And by the time you get to the end of the year, you kind of forget all the stuff that you've done. So it really is nice to be able to take stock and pull together all of the different activities, and then you can suddenly realize it's like, oh, actually, we accomplished quite a bit. And I have to say, I'm really proud of what we put together for this year. So again, we'll go through this fairly quickly, and as always, and then I know Jane has a short presentation on some of the elements. So I'll try not to dive too much into your material, Jane, because I know I usually steal all your good anecdotes and things like that. So we'll try and gloss over your achievements, and then we'll pop back over to you. But again, this just some great shots from this year on the cover. You'll notice the branding. Just to we already started this with our reports of using the Wool Council branding over the Campaign for Wool. There's often Campaign for Wool is obviously how we began, and it is still very much our public-facing program in terms of how we engage the general public on the wonders of wool in general, as well as specifically looking at opportunities for Canadian wool. So this report kind of contextualizes that work a little bit better about kind of separating the work that the Wool Council as a wider organization does to support the Canadian industry, things like research and development, our role at the International Wool Textile Organization, and then we've kept the Campaign for Wool branding around the branding and marketing section. And so hopefully that's all a bit clear, but feel free to ask questions if you are concerned. So again, the major highlights of the year, again, we had an amazing program of research, which Jane will dive into. We had 2 new Fabric of Canada films helping to tell the stories of Canadian wool and the Canadians who transform it. We had 60 million media impressions. So again, it was a good year for media of wool being talked about, and obviously our work, but a lot of other there's a lot happening in the industry in general. So it's great to be able to see that reflected in some really great numbers for the industry. Our Wool Month program, which we'll go into, one of the great achievements of this year was the fact that we brought the world to Canada for the very first time. For the global wool industry had a meeting in Canada, and this was due to our leadership, first of securing Canada's first ever seat at the International Wool Textile Organization, and then both bidding for and securing that very first meeting, and that was in Montreal, and we'll get into that in a moment. Part of that, what made that such a special event as well, was we opened with a new funding announcement. So the federal government announced a new 3-year agreement. So this comes on the heels of the original 2-year agreement, which, as far as anyone can tell us so far, seems to be the first time in a very long time, if ever, that the federal government has put money into the wool industry. As always, it's not enough. It's not, oh, we'd always want more. We did ask for more, but we're in a competitive marketplace, and the fact that we're now getting support towards wool for the very first time is an achievement unto itself. And the fact that the federal government is seeing the value of what we're doing and is extending that work. We can always complain in quiet that we need more, and we're certainly working on that. But we are really excited at that confidence and that trust that's been placed in us, and expanding that work over the next 3 years. And then, of course, we'll get into our 2024 priorities. So again, Jane's going to dive into some of the research, so I'll just sort of gloss it over: the shearing plan, the upholstery plan, the wool standard. In terms of branding and marketing, again, for those of you who haven't seen the films, I really recommend. The entire series is amazing, but it tells really, this was all part of a wider effort to really brand Canadian wool. We took our inspiration. I can't take total credit. We took our inspiration from our American cousins. For those of you who've ever seen American Wool's experience series, film series, they are, again, classic sort of tales of different parts of the American wool industry, and they branded it quite well. So we, sort of following in the footsteps, created our Fabric of Canada full film series, which again telling different stories of from different parts of the country, telling heritage, different parts of the industry. And so this year we had 2 films, one that was focused on shearing as a good way of dovetailing with the shearing plan, and looking at a farm just west of Toronto with North America's original flock of Shetlands, and again, in talking about obviously the importance of shearing to our wider industry. If we don't have shearers, we don't have wool for sale. The second film focused on Alberta. Again, another, both Alberta and Ontario are, of course, we serve the entire country, but they're especially close to our hearts because both of their producer organizations are also funder supporters of the campaign. And so we thought it was high time that we had an Alberta story, and this one is a great one because it is sheep that the wool from the sheep actually goes into our carpet programs and ends up at Leah's mill, and is turned into yarn for our existing rug partnership, and the new one that will be debuting this year. And in this report, we see some of the designs of that. But the way that these sheep are raised is that they're actually used to maintain solar energy installations. So it's a really neat application because it gives the farmers access to great grazing land, and it ensures that the people who run the solar arrays don't have to pay to have that mowed and all the carbon emissions that go along with that. And this has been a really successful initiative. So if you haven't seen these films, they're available on our YouTube channel. The point of sale kits, again, this is just a core service that we've provided for many, many years, where we provide postcards, tags, signage. This is all professionally developed content, lovely images. The images and the message change every year. We also have specific elements, as you can see here, related to Canadian wool. And we provide these, again, free of charge to anyone who sells wool products across the country to make it easier to educate your consumers on the wonders of wool. So we send out hundreds of those each year. Spinning Yarn Speaker Series, you're here, you know. We had a great variety of speakers last year, and this is going to continue. Again, we want to be able to highlight all sort of neat operations. Again, we have some past, like Leah on the call, some past participants, because we want to be able to highlight the amazing things happening in Canada, as well as some interesting things from around the world. And so I think one thing to look for in 2024 is we'll also have some more, in addition to the Canadian speakers, we'll have some international speakers to give us an insight into the wool industry in other parts of the world. Shearing Day, of course, is one of our big media engagement events to be able to dispel myths.
This first.
Sorry? So I thought we had a question there. So that we use to dispel myths about what goes into shearing and show, again, all the care and attention that it forms part of the wool harvest. And that is usually a great opportunity to engage with both our supporters as well as media and others. We had a small Wool Month reception this year where we honored Ontario's outgoing Lieutenant Governor, who was the longest serving Lieutenant Governor in the province's history, the Honorable Elizabeth Dowdeswell, but who was a big supporter of ours from the very beginning and participated in many, many Wool Month events over the years, including 1 year sewing her own Harris tweed cape, which she debuted at the Rowe Winter Fair as part of a big event. So again, we wanted to, as she was heading off into retirement, we wanted to thank her for her service to Canada's wool industry. As a royal patronage, we were one of a few organizations that were asked to participate in the Canadian coronation celebrations for their Majesties. So that was, again, a really special opportunity in Ottawa. And again, we were one of only 6 organizations in total that were included as part of that. And we had booths both at the Parliament Hill event as well as the public event at Rideau Hall. So again, a great way of getting out our message and celebrating this important day for Canada and therefore the world. Media, again, as I mentioned, our 60 million number overall. Again, some really great articles from the National Post, Globe and Mail, Toronto Sun, talking some producer media here, like Western Producer, Ontario Farmer. We've been getting the word out, and that is at the heart of why we were created to begin with, and that continues to be a driving force of a lot of our work. Again, some of the social media numbers there. Thank you for liking and supporting, and please continue to share and promote. I neglected to introduce Lydia at the beginning, but we will get to that. Lydia replaces Alyssa and is our new program and communications coordinator. So she will be the driving force behind a lot of our social media going forward. This year's Holt Renfrew collection featured beautiful knitwear from Canadian designer Line, who have been a longtime partner of ours. Some really nice pieces there. I think some of them are actually on, there's a couple of them left on sale. So if you haven't got them yet, please do check out their website. The Canadian coronation blanket, again, this was using the official, we licensed the design from the Government of Canada. It's a beautiful green and gold design that includes all of the provincial and territorial floral emblems, as well as the maple leaf. And again, 100% of the profits go right back to supporting the campaign for wool. So we would encourage you to check that out. A beautiful value-added application for Canadian wool. We got the initial designs for our newest rug collection, which will be debuting on the West Coast, and which is designed by the same hereditary chief featured in our Fabric of Canada film from 2 years ago on Coast Salish weaving, and features traditional Coast Salish designs. And that is woven with 100% Canadian wool that has been spun into yarn at the Briggs and Little Mill in New Brunswick. So those will actually be available for commercial order this spring, and will be debuting the full collection now, but we released the designs this wool month. As I mentioned, the IWTO, again, is a very important part of the role that the Wool Council plays in bringing together the Canadian industry and then also representing our interests to the world. So we participated in 2 meetings. We had a small group take place at the Congress in Kyoto in May, and that included a couple Canadian presentations. You see Carol there, the chair of the Wool Interiors Group, one of Canada's big ongoing contributions. Jane is a member of that group as well. So again, that is an example where Canada is providing leadership to the world. And of course, interiors is one of the value-added applications that we've identified for Canadian wool, where we can make a good profit while being able to pay our producers fair prices. So some images from Kyoto. Those of you who know Ellen, I didn't see if Ellen was on the call, but from Mariposa Bill, she was the first Canadian ever selected for the Young Professionals program. So again, an added professional development for people working in the wool industry. The call for this year's Young Professional Program is on right now. So again, if any of you are interested in attending, this is taking place in April, and it's in Adelaide in Australia. So if you've ever wanted to visit the Saudi Arabia of wool, then now is your chance. Adelaide is the heart of the Australian wool industry, and Australia, of course, produces the largest quantity of superfine wool, which is the part of the wool industry globally that is the most profitable. Therefore, it's a really interesting chance to see that side of the business. Yeah, so Ellen was our first young professional, but the real achievement was getting that, not going to see the world, but getting the world to come to us. And I said, even at that meeting, even as amazing as it was to have representatives from all of the major wool producing countries for the first time ever in Montreal, and the amazing presentations, what made it incredibly special was the fact that we had 26 Canadian participants, and I don't think anyone has ever had that many value chain members in one place. And we had mill owners, we had designers, we had retailers, we had manufacturers, we had producers, so just on the Canadian side, this was an incredible opportunity to learn from each other and also share our stories with the global market. I was seeing sort of business dealings happening in real time, which was really quite amazing. But also just the energy in the room of, because again, I think oftentimes we work in our silos. It can be quite isolating. You sometimes wonder, sort of how this all links together. And it's an event like this where you can really see the bigger picture and also see that we are doing some really amazing things here in Canada, and we do have value to add to the global industry as we learn from that industry and try and recruit investment and support by growing out our own industry. So some of the fun photos there. One of the great details was that when the conference opened, was the first major snowfall for Montreal for the year. And so you see in one of the pictures there, our Southern Hemisphere colleagues, particularly from South Africa and Australia, were loving it. And many of them had never seen snow ever before. So they were just sort of staring out the window in delight. We, of course, didn't have the heart to tell them that it only gets worse from there, but it produced sort of a magical setting that really helped to frame the first ever meeting in Canada very well. I think I saw Serge is on the call today, and so they were one of several Canadian sponsors that we had as to help put on the event. But you'll see many familiar faces there. Whole Renfrew hosted at Ogilvy, their Montreal location, hosted one of the dinners one of the nights. So again, it was a really special opportunity to really show off the best of what we had. I mentioned the federal government announcement. That's what opened the conference. Again, we're really excited to have had that. A list of some of the speakers. Again, just a really interesting mix of presentations. Everything from like a Calgary-based mattress company, Vancouver-based rug company. We had the Sheep Federation. We had Holt Renfrew. We had a company out of Mississauga that's creating a treatment that can be used in wool scouring. And we even had the head of one of the largest clothing manufacturing companies in North America, which just happens to be right here in Canada, and it was in Montreal, Peerless Clothing, which we've been working on for many years to engage, and they literally produce millions of suits here in Canada. They're one of the biggest companies you've never heard of, and are the largest producer of menswear in North America. So it was a really amazing cross-section, and at every level of value chain. I forgot to mention Nancy, one of our producers, who told the amazing story of how she's using animal welfare best practice and regenerative agriculture on her sheep farm. So yeah, a wonderful presentations, and a great opportunity for Canadian wool. So all that to say, very busy year. So just wanted to again give the context. This is This is an image from where we began with their Majesties back in 2014, and then where we stand right now as the only national organization connecting the entire value chain and promoting the wonders of wool while developing opportunities for Canadian wool and the Canadians who transform it. For 2024, our main priorities are to leverage the 10th anniversary of the campaign in media and in our programming. We want to start to look at providing direct skills training opportunities. So again, building on some of the research that we've been doing and operationalizing that and training up individuals in some of the key areas where we need support, like shearing. And once again, promoting innovative applications for Canadian wool, trying to encourage new product development, not just obviously the projects that we invest in, but other projects across the country, as well as new commercial partnerships to find new value-added applications for Canadian wool. And so, we have to give a nod to our funding partners. Thank you. We could not do all that we do without your support. So thank you again for the confidence that you place in us, our farms and other supporters. So that's, again, very quick summary. You can download the report and read it in depth as part of your bedtime ritual. But that should give you a nice overview for where we went in 2023 and where we are hoping to go for 2024. Now, before we dive into questions, I know Jane is going to dive into a little more of those areas, especially around research. So perhaps I will hand it over to Jane in the interim, and then we'll open it up for a wider discussion.
Great, thank you, Matthew. Before we put up the presentation, I feel the need to salute Matthew's efforts over 2023, and even since the campaign came to Canada. I don't think folks realize just how much of this work is done single-handedly. It really is. There's not a big team. There's not a whole lot of infrastructure around it. It's really just a lot of creative ideas, great connections, great networking, a tremendous ability to be diplomatic across all these varied groups of stakeholders. So, Matthew, you deserve a lot of credit.
That's very kind. Thank you.
Oh, all right. So I worked on, among other things, I worked on 3 projects this year that kind of take a deep dive into specific aspects of our wool industry. So I'll ask Lydia, I might end up calling you Alyssa, and if I do, I'm going to apologize. But Lydia is our new right-hand person, and she has been a great help in putting together the PowerPoint today. So I'll ask you, Lydia, to go to the next slide. There we go. The shearing plan. So one of the 3 projects was the shearing plan. This is the plan I feel that most closely touches the producer and the sheep. Next slide, please. What we, with the help of a round table, with the help of a steering committee, we identified that there's 4 areas that we can come together on in shearing. The 3 ways to bring up the shearing industry, it was determined that it's further education, it's opportunities to do exchanges, to go to foreign countries and do apprenticeships on larger farms where you get access to bigger flocks to shear at once, where you get your technique mastered, you get your time, the time it takes you to shear a sheep mastered, and competitions. Competitions are a way for one shearer to test their skills against another, to learn from another, and to come together in kind of a fellowship. So we thought that outreach that provides mentoring, that provides perhaps insurance, networking opportunities, health and wellness, a way to feel part of a bigger community, developing an outreach component to a national shearing organization, setting up exchanges that can be knowing where to go in New Zealand, South Africa, Faroe Islands, wherever you want to go and learn a little bit more about shearing. An organization like a national shearing organization could be there to help you with placements and to fund that trip. Competitions, there's an opportunity to bring together contributors for purse money, for sponsorships. We can create a Team Canada that travels internationally for these competitions, where we have a little bit more support. If you look at Golden Shears, some of those bigger competitions, nations that are sending their team, they do a lot of fanfare, a lot of publicity. I would like to see Team Canada, which is I believe most often led by Don Metherall and Amber Peterson. I would like to see a little more publicity for them when they're traveling for these competitions. And of course, bringing shearing competitions to Canada, having locations across Canada where local shearers at beginner levels, intermediate levels can test themselves and learn from one another. And a retail component. It's one of the ways that you can begin to fund some of this work is by creating custom apparel, things like that. This is how we sort of saw bringing the shearing industry together. And of course, all of it is hinging on education as well. If we could just skip to the next slide. There were a lot of folks who came together to help us put this project together. We had an advisory circle that was represented by shearers coast to coast. We looked to our international community, big thanks to Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, who shared their learning and how they developed a cohesive national shearing organization. And as well, some of the other people that help us every day, IWTO campaign, not Canadian Wool Council, Campaign for Wool Global, our friends that we have through there at British Wool. They're always a great help to us when we're trying to piece together the puzzle of something like shearing industry. We'll go on to the upholstery plan, and if there's any questions about shearing or any other aspect, we can come back to it. So the upholstery plan, we looked at, when we do these plans, we look for export opportunities. Where can we bring Canadian wool to the masses? If you could jump to the next slide, please, Lydia. When we looked at how to do this, we saw two opportunities. We saw the residential and commercial upholstery application, and we saw the transportation industry. What we need to be aware of is we have a niche quantity of wool. We don't have the amount of wool that the larger wool producing nations have. So we have to be specific in our projects, and they have to be able to fit into the parameters of the realities of our wool industry. Canada is one of the largest furniture manufacturers for export in the world. We're known for producing a lot of high quality furniture. We realized that Canadian wool upholstery would have an opportunity if it partnered with existing furniture manufacturers. On its own, Canadian wool will have difficulty penetrating a global market for the normal regular consumer. Our wool will track a little bit higher and we'll have a harder time competing globally if we're just exporting bolts of upholstery. But when it is applied to furniture for export, we have a really great opportunity to do custom collections of upholstery with high-end furniture manufacturers. For the transportation industry, we identified the private jet sector. Why? Because it's a very controlled environment. We have a finite number of new jets going into the global air portfolio every year. If I remember my numbers, it's about 750 new airplanes are going into the sky. We know that the most common airplanes have on average 19 seats, and you look at about 2 meters of upholstery per seat. So that's a whole per year. That is a manageable amount of upholstery. And we also know that the price point can be a little bit more forgiving when we're using such a specific application for our wool. Next slide, please. For that plan, we look to a lot of the furniture organizations, textile organizations across Canada to give us insight on where Canada sits in the global scale. So we thank the folks here, and again, we come back to IWTO. They're instrumental in helping us understand our industry better. So, okay. And the last one's the wool standard. Roadmap through Canada's wool industry. So this was a little bit of a different challenge, a little bit of a fun challenge. I'll have you go to the next slide, Lydia. Our wool standard doesn't look like other countries' wool standards. We had a roundtable of folks volunteering to put together what does a Canadian wool standard look like when we don't have a real clear understanding of how much wool is on farm, how much of one particular breed we have, etc. So instead, for this first edition, the approach was to create a document that answers most of the questions that people like Matthew and I get every day. We get these questions from people, from non-Canadians and Canadians alike. People want to know, how does the Canadian wool, how is the wool industry structured? Who organizes it? What legislation do you use? How do you know where your wool is? What's your traceability system look like? What are your breeds? What's the average micron? How are your animals cared for? So that's basically what we did, is we just took those pertinent questions and mapped them out and put them in the wool standard. The intention is that we revisit this document every 2 years, and I hope that 2 years from now, we will be able to say that we have, X volume of 27 to 29 micron wool in Canada. We have this volume of fine wool. I hope that we will be able to describe our grading systems a little bit better, but we are an industry that's still in its infancy, I think, or the rebirth of the industry is in its infancy. And so this to me made the most sense to get the ball rolling, and hopefully we'll garner enough interest from this document that in 2 years, we'll have other people coming to the table saying, I'd like to contribute to putting together a wool standard that looks more like New Zealand or the UK or South Africa. Last slide, please, Lydia. And so we had a working group that came together to put the initial plan together. And then it was sent out to a large number of people to give feedback. I think it was sent out to somewhere around 100 people to give feedback on it. And what you have today is sort of a little bit of everyone's opinion, their thoughts, what they think should have been included. And so that, I guess, kind of sums up the 3 projects that we dove into this year. And of course, thank you to our sponsors, our donors, all the stakeholders who in their own way either support us by buying wool, by giving us sharing their experience, their feedback. It's all very, very helpful. That's all. That's what I got.
Fabulous. Well, and allow me to share the love around again, and thank you, Jane, for all of the work that you did to make this year such a success, and all the heavy research. I know, again, you see like a nice glossy report at the end. It can kind of be deceptive of how difficult that is to put together, and the many meetings and discussions that have to go in before you can even sit down and write the first line. So again, applause to you for being our go-to on so many of these important research questions. Because again, it's important to remember that when the campaign first began, we were meant to be an addendum to the existing industry to provide, the branding and marketing support as an addition. And the more that we worked in the space, the more that we got to know, the more we realized there was a need for a lot of this sort of work that hadn't been done for a very long time, if at all. And so strategies, documents like a wool standard, these are the elements you need to build a successful industry, looking at these high value added applications as you had. And what's amazing is your work, it's not just academic, but it's already being transformed into commercial action, and we've seen that certainly with the carpet plan from the previous year, where we're seeing now multiple, this partnership we have with the with Burt Brothers and Colin Campbell in Vancouver is now the second commercial partnership in carpets. But I know even some of the models that you developed for the carpet plan are being used not just by our direct partners, but by many others. And I don't want to give other people's stories away, but we know that your models have been used to take on very large commercial projects and help to overcome some of these barriers. So applause to you for all of your hard work in that space. So now
Can I
that we've
say something? Can I say something?
of course, yes. Oh, yeah. Well, let's
I'm
continue
not
to.
done. I'm not done. You cut me off.
We'll continue the self-congratulation, and then maybe we'll squeeze in a question at the end.
What I want to, I think, remind people too is that the Canadian wool value chain is really, really long. And what I've learned in working with all of you in each silo of the supply chain is the importance that the person ahead of you and the person behind you plays. Each person, each like stop on the supply chain has its own culture, its own needs, its own challenges. If you're talking to the farmer, you've got to be aware of what the farmer's reality is. When you're talking to the consumer, you've got to be aware of what the consumer's reality is. Talking to the spinner, the weaver, the felter, you've got to understand what they have to go through to get the job done for you. And so when I was speaking with Sasha, who's on the call today, I was saying, one of the things that I think folks have to decide when they're going to work with Canadian wool is that they want to tell the Canadian wool story. And that involves understanding Canadian sheep, Canadian farmers, Canadian shearers, Canadian scourers, Canadian. You can tell a wool story and we'll support you just the same. We are the Campaign for Wool and we're a global organization. IWTO is a global organization. But if you want to bring the Canadian farm story into the picture, it involves a whole breadth of I think, considerations to do so. And that's been part of the pleasure of the work that I've gotten to do in those plans, is touching each one of those silos on the supply chain and understanding how they function. And I think that's why our plans have success. I think that's why people will adopt them or look at them quite carefully. And I can tell you, even going back to the wool plan, that plan has traveled globally. People come back to me all the time saying, somebody mentioned that plan in Italy, in France, in the UK, in Australia. And I think it's because we do take that special look at each stakeholder in the chain. So that's what I wanted to say. If you're going to work with Canadian wool, make sure you tell the farm story and know what everybody needs on your supply chain.
Exactly. That's a very good point. Yeah, let's get into questions. Lydia, if you want to handle the questions from the chat, and then Carrie, I see we've got your hand up, so why don't we go to you first?
Thank you. My name's Carrie Munvan. I'm a longtime knitter, a more recent sheep producer. I raise sheep, and also a knitwear designer. I'm also on the board of directors for the Canadian Wool Collective. First thing I want to say is congratulations. There's a lot that you guys have covered in terms of what you've done last year and what's coming up and over the last 10 years. And that's really exciting. I do. And I also think I was very grateful, Matthew, for you to say right off the top that the investment that the federal government has contributed is, well, you didn't say this. You said we need more. It's peanuts. When you look at the scale of the federal budget, yes. I mean, that's less than we've invested in starting producing wool on a farm in Canada. So I think that sometimes when we get into millions, people kind of go, oh, wow, that's a lot of money. In the grander scheme of things, it's nothing, quite frankly, and we need to continue to advocate for more. So I was grateful to hear you say that that advocacy needs to continue. I do have a couple of questions in terms of focus. I know that in a lot of what you guys have talked about, there's a real emphasis on export and luxury goods. And I feel like it skips over a lot of what's really required in terms of speaking to Canadians about the value of Canadian wool. And not just for wool suits, but for everyday clothing, not just for carpets in embassies across the world, but for wool insulation, and I think somehow as a consumer, the kinds of items and articles and the international focus that seems very prominent, that doesn't resonate for me. And I think that would probably be true for a lot of people, especially right now when we are looking at this economic situation where people are really looking at how do they cover the basics. So let's look at how valuable all the different applications of wool are. I know that I can see from some of your lists that there are some sort of in the design community, in the crafting community that have been part of the conversation. But I think that there's so much conversation that needs to be had in Canada with Canadians. Even, and I think because I come from the crafting side of things initially, indie dyers usually use wool that's, if not grown, processed internationally when there's so much in Canada that could be used. And anyway, so that's a little bit of a question. I'm going to sandwich that by saying I'm really grateful for all the work that you guys have done and the outreach and I was disappointed I found the meeting in Montreal, which is just a couple hours from me, inaccessible from a financial perspective. And I recognized that it was the IWTO that set the bar, but it was very high. So that was unfortunate, but I'm glad that you were there and now these conversations are happening. And I look forward to continuing to be part of the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that, Carrie. And again, it's especially when you're in the position that we are in terms of when we began this 10 years ago and kind of gradually, as I said, just started purely as what we thought would just be an add-on in terms of comms promotion, of media and marketing, and then have gradually added on these other pieces. You're not, we want to be servicing the industry as widely as possible. So things like, for example, the point of sale kits, the artisanal partnerships. Many of you have seen, like, for example, the hooked rugs that we did the previous year, the sculptures, things like that, as a way of highlighting the work on the artisanal side, which is, as I say at the international meetings and time again, the artisanal side of the industry is the part of the industry that's working. So that is the portion of the Canadian industry that does well, and we want to be able to tell their stories. A lot of our challenge, or writ large, comes from trying to deal with that traditional 90% of Canadian wool that was being sent to China, India, other places, just as a bulk commodity exports. So when we're looking at some of these larger industrial partnerships, it's with an eye of how we, not about the 10% that's being utilized in the artisanal market, but how do we redirect the other 90% and turn that into a high value added product. And in order to pay, because again, you're trying to balance these different demands, but yes, we do tend to gravitate towards the higher value products because that's what allows us to be able to pay everyone fairly along the way. There is challenges comes when you have a lower value add product like insulation, which we did. For example, we did an insulation project a few years ago. Some of you may remember our wool house project in Toronto. And again, I don't like to speak too ill of our partners because they've also been very supportive of us. But products like that, the margins are very narrow. And so what it means is that they often rely on a very low wool price to be able to make that product work. So we tend to put more of our effort into products like rugs or upholstery or things like that, where the return is higher to enable us to pay at every step of the way. But absolutely, I understand your feedback, and I want to be able to, and definitely taken under advisement in terms of we are always trying to balance our general messages of wool, trying to engage the public, get them excited about the properties of wool in general, regardless of where it comes from, as well as adding kind of that unique Canadian spin and angle to so that people better understand our fiber and the amazing things that it can be turned into. But I hope that helps to answer your question. I don't know, Jane, if you had anything you wanted to add there.
I don't really have a whole lot to add, Carrie. I echo everything you say. Making wool accessible to the everyday person is a challenge. From my experience, the advice has been that Canadian wool is too high a quality for wool insulation. Normally wool insulation, we would look for it to be 34, 35, 36 microns, whereas Canada's average is around 27 to 29 microns. We also have an issue with some of our flocks are small, so there's not a whole lot of wool coming from one farm, and that farm will tend to work with a mini mill. The capacity of a mini mill puts the price point where it puts it. And sometimes the end product coming out in small batches, the price is too high for any of us to be wearing, other than like a specialty garment right now. I don't know if that will ever change for Canadian wool. I really don't. And I'm not sure that it needs to. We can get lots of, I think wool is through the, IWTO and other countries, wool is accessible, to the median population. But for Canada, we don't have a lot of uniformity or a lot of volume and a lot of high capacity processors to shrink that price down. And this is why we've opted from the very beginning to look at luxury applications where there's not so much of a sticker shock. There is a little bit more flexibility or a little bit more tolerance to higher prices. And also those luxury items, they get more widespread attention. So it puts more spotlight down to all the areas in our wool industry. Those are my comments. But again, wouldn't we all love to have a wardrobe full of wool? I would. But we have to work with what we have, being aware of the Canadian realities.
I do. I mean, I do like to, even with an eye to these larger industrial projects like carpeting, like upholstery that we focus on, I still like to, like we did a few years ago with the 100-mile jacket, to show that we can make, luxury clothing. We can make things that can do well and can stand up to sort of the best in the world. But I think writ large, Jane's point is right in terms of apparel. Like obviously, we're not going to be able to compete with sort of the finer microns offered by countries like Australia, but we have our niche, and it's best to be able to elevate that wherever we can, to be able to get the general customer understanding the value of natural fiber, and hopefully that's something that we have always done and will continue to do. Well, again, looking to see what we can do with that 90% that we were just sending off for blending wool, and what we can turn into that will also be sort of identifiably Canadian, and that we can take pride in, paying a better price than we could get on the global commodities market. Do we have any questions from the text, Lydia?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions in the chat. One from Jackie about education. So I'm just going to read it out for you. My learning and exposure to sheep and wool came from our local 4-H group and community in our agriculture class in school. Has there been any plans to work with 4-H Canada and provincially and agriculture in classroom to educate and train for development of the industry and shearing plan?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I can start off. I know, Jane, this may have come up in some of your roundtable discussions. We have engaged with 4-H in the past. We've done some small initiatives, but nothing major. And I think that's actually quite a good idea to be able to, as we look at how we could roll out training. I think that would be a natural partner. Jane, maybe you definitely know more on this than I do. So maybe I don't know if 4-H came up in your discussions.
4-H has come up over the years, mostly in terms of shearing. I know Don Metherall, who's star of the Fabric of Canada video series and one of our top shearers, he teaches young people through the 4-H program, and it's very popular. He teaches something that's called, I think, Learn to Shear a Sheep in a Day or something like that, where, you know, at the end of a day or a weekend, the kids are walking away with some good skills. I would like to see 4-H take on some wool classing, because often it's kids on farm who are helping on shearing day by sorting the wool, doing the skirting. So I would like to see that come out in the 4-H programming. I also know that Canadian Sheep Breeders Association offers a scholarship to 4-H clubs across Canada each year. They can put in for a project. So if your local 4-H club is looking for a project, sheep breeders can offer a little bit of financial assistance, and Campaign for Wool, Canadian Wool Council, can help connect you with people to teach a little bit of wool classing in those courses, in those sessions. That's what I have to say on that one.
Okay, thanks for that, Jane. Just a couple more questions around events. Elise Campbell is asking, will you be participating in the Made in Canada Sustainable Fiber Arts Conference in Grosmont, Newfoundland, in any capacity this fall?
We currently no, but would love to learn more about that conference. And I have been to Grossmorn once before, and it's such a beautiful part of the country. So perhaps we could be tempted to come back. Newfoundland, of course, is as a province in general is a place where we've done a lot of work over the years. I'm still trying to actually get our bust, our busts of the king and the late Queen back. They've been at Government House there for so long. I think they believe that now they're part of their collection. But we've had them on long-term loan, and they've done very well there, been a very popular addition. But certainly the work that we did with the Rug Hooking Guild was great fun, and we're actually planning a follow-up show of those pieces that were based on the Group of 7 designs, and of course we had done a showing of those at the rooms in St. John. So, anyways, all that to say, Newfoundland is a place where we've done a lot of work and would love to learn more about the conference. So perhaps if you could send us on that information, we'd love to learn more.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. We have a really interesting question from Barbara Williams. Oops, just my screen jumped. Sorry about that. Okay. From what I have heard, one of the big stumbling blocks for Canadian wool is access to scouring facilities. Mini mills frequently are incredibly backlogged in processing wool, and if the clips have already scoured, the timeline might speed up. What would there be any capacity for offering grants to the development of regional scouring facilities?
Well, in terms of money, certainly we don't have the money for grants, but so that might be a question for government. Yeah, I think again, I think the mini mills have a very particular role that they play, and in supporting the artisanal side of the industry, as I mentioned. But as you know, capacity is such an issue, and when you're looking at these larger commercial applications, so again, it works well when you're providing hand knitting yarns and things like that, but it's not effective when you need very large volumes. That once you're working with bigger producers, you need to create some of these products. So I mean, we've looked at this. I mean, some of this was addressed in the carpet plan, was looking at different pipelines. The fact of the matter, I mean, you know, one of the largest, you know, scourers that we have right now, you know, we've got her on the call, is Leah, who's, you know, mostly, you know, focused on her own product. But again, there's only a couple like Leah in the country, and mostly in the same vein, where they have medium-sized scouring capacity, but they're scouring primarily for their own products. So it's not really open for other producers in the same way. We buy our finished yarn for our carpets from Leah, for example. But if you're looking to really scale up in terms of access, then you have to start to look at other avenues, because again, even amongst those medium size, we just don't have the capacity. We have looked at this on the large scale. I mean, one for a few $1 million, which is not insignificant, but a few $1 million investment. I think the last time I looked at it, it was about five. You could build a plant that could handle all of Canada's wool and then some, and then we'll be importing wool from the US and other places to make it work. The thing is though, you can't get support to build something like that until you have kind of a proven business plan. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg scenario. So I think what we've been trying to do in the interim is maximize all the Canadian avenues that we can, like we're like buying yarn, for example, from Leah, working with some of the mini mills when we have smaller projects in terms of that they can handle, but then also looking at other models, other places in the short term that we can send. And in the carpet plan, it looked at, for example, a place in the UK that's certainly for Eastern Canada by sending by ship. Actually, the carbon footprint, and I see we have a question on carbon, so I'll get to that in a moment. But the carbon footprint, actually, ironically, of shipping wool from Montreal to the UK by sea is less than shipping it by truck across the country if it was going in the other way. So sometimes things that seem counterintuitive, like using large scale processing in another country, actually can be the better option. And I mean, and that plant, they could handle, again, they're a plant that could handle Canada's entire capacity, or Canada's entire clip in 1 week. Now, that's not what we want to do for the long term, but if we can demonstrate demand, then I think we can prove the business case to build some of these scouring facilities. But this is part of our ongoing conversation with government in general, because I think absolutely there's a role to be played in terms of grant making, in terms of fund matching and support. But even then, like, government's still going to want to make sure that you're not going to be opening a plant and then the next year it's going to be shuttering because we don't have the capacity. So I don't know, Jane, if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
I would come back to the direct question for funding. I have noticed that a lot of provincial governments are stepping up to the plate when it comes to funding for any type of sustainable development or innovation. I would think that if you had a really strong business plan for bringing in a smaller scale scouring capacity, you would have no problem getting community or regional support. I have found in my conversations a lot of open-mindedness toward that. And if you need help with that type of exercise, I would say reach out to Matthew and we can help anyone collaborate on putting that type of business plan together. We have those numbers at our disposal.
Yeah, I mean, I should clarify as well, like the federal government money that we received is through a specific program called the agri-marketing program. So it's limited in terms of the areas that you can fund. It's mostly around branding, marketing. And they actually, one of the areas they specifically do not fund is product development or business plan development. So that would have to be sort of another bucket. And I know some provinces do offer those sorts of support, Ontario, for example, but would love to be able to identify other provinces that would be willing to put up money as well, as we build the wider business case for building scouring capacity. Oh, and I see, Jane, you actually addressed the private jet question. Again, it's one of these things. It is an industry that is, it's a high value added industry in Canada, but of course it's carbon intensive. But again, I think you can tie yourself into knots as an industry association, trying what you will do and won't do. I don't think it's so. I think a lot of us are still taking planes. I don't think aviation's unfortunately going anywhere anytime soon. There may be different factors that limit it or make it more expensive or things like that. But certainly, I think Jane's point in that it is an industry like transportation in general. I think auto manufacturing is another one. We saw this with Volvo that just brought in wool seats and wool upholstered seats. They're an industry that can absorb the cost of wool upholstery and that have a customer base that are willing to pay for it. So I can only tackle so many of the world's problems at once. But
I would add to when we look at what we would when we're doing a feasibility study, one of the things we consider is how realistic is it for Canadian wool, no matter how good it is, no matter what our quality is, how realistic would it be for us to service that industry? And one of I said in the comment, but I think it bears repeating. There's really only 5 or 6 companies in the world doing private jets. The funding that we had for this project was geared toward export because our Canadian government wants to encourage export. We also have a Canadian company, Bombardier, that has 29% market share. To me, that seems like an easy door in to say, hey, we've done this model for wool upholstery. Would you test it? And I know that the Canadian jet industry wants to focus more on refurbishment than putting new product in the sky. It's a whole subsector. They are looking, like any other industry, to do things that are more sustainable. So they're looking for natural materials in their interiors. And so they are people that can forward our story faster than if we, we're looking in a different area. We don't have a whole lot of wool to put into doing, I guess, trains all over the world that requires more wool. This is a really finite size of industry. So that's why, just to give you a bit of thinking of what goes into our projects, we're not just looking for the biggest, glitziest, glammest applications. We're looking for where can we make a case, and can we make a case with an organization or an industry that could help forward our message or spread the word.
Lydia, do we have maybe we should take one more question, and just conscious that we're a little over on time.
Yeah, maybe one more question here from Jackie. Are you working with Canadian Wool Growers Co-op on these projects and initiatives?
Yeah, so Wool Growers was one of our founding partners on that windy pier in Pictou, Nova Scotia, many years ago. In the last few years, they've had a change of strategy themselves and are less focused on the sort of work that we take on, but wherever possible, we try and work together. So an example of that is when we had the conference in Montreal, that we invited them to come and present, and they asked for Sheep Federation to do a joint presentation on their work and wool growers. So they were included, and we were pleased to be able to have a wool growers representative there as part of it. So we were able to present a united face of the Canadian industry to the world. And I think that that's tremendously important, and we'll continue to work with wool growers wherever we can. And so certainly when we identify, especially when we need larger quantities of wool, that is often the first place we will check. So yeah, but we always have new and exciting ideas that we take around to our partners. So we hope to involve them in a broader swath of our work soon. And I think
just past the time, so if you have any closing remarks or.
Yeah, so I just wanted to, well, do you want to give a sneak preview of our next Spinning Yarn speaker series?
Sure, we're still working to finalize the date, but our next speaker series will be the second week of March, and we'll be having Philippa Wright from Campaign for Wool New Zealand joining us in conversation with Matthew. Yeah, so stay tuned for that. The flyers and the registration link should be coming within the next couple of weeks.
And due to the horrendous time differences, that meeting will, I think, be a little later in the day. I think it'll still be reasonable for us. It'll be around 5 o'clock. Or 4 or 5 o'clock, I think we're looking at our time to be able to make that work with New Zealand. But stay tuned, because the New Zealand Campaign for Wool is a really dynamic organization, and they we take a lot of inspiration from them, particularly in their funding model, because they actually have direct support from the industry, and which enables them to do actually a lot more. So it'd be really interesting to get that perspective. And Philippa, in addition to being involved with the campaign in general, has been in the wool business herself for her entire life, and so brings, I think, a really interesting perspective. Well, I just want to thank Jane for joining me. I want to thank this wonderful large group that we had over lunch. Thank you for giving up your lunch hours to hear us gab on about wool. And again, our door is always open for ideas, for projects. Please do reach out. If you sell wool and you haven't got one of our point of sale kits, please do reach out and we'll send that along. And thank you for all that you do to help advance the industry. This is a group effort. There's no one person or organization that can claim credit for everything that's going on. But together we are building this industry one stitch at a time, and it's very exciting. It can be frustrating sometimes, because anytime you're trying to rebuild an industry, there's certainly days where you wonder, what have I done? But overall, I think our view has always been that you're really on the side of the angels with this industry. I mean, it is not only is it one of the oldest industries in human history, but it's exactly where we need to take the world. We need to be focused more on natural fibers, more on sustainability, and wool is one of those miracle products that offers that in abundance. So thank you very much, everyone. #ChooseWool, and we look forward to celebrating with you throughout our 10th anniversary year here in Canada. Have a great day.